As things stand, we begin with information about what's happening in the world. There are fierce clashes between Israel and Lebanon. They are already canceling the negotiations between the United States and Iran. The plane had to turn back, the trip is cancelled. It's simply something that's not possible right now. Within Iran, one faction is gaining ground in the dialogue with the United States. The military wing is overtaking the political wing in that country. We'll discuss the details with Jerez, covering global events and what's happening in Mexico. And well, go ahead and give it a like, go ahead and share it. In the meantime, let's start with this pretty shocking image. These are some of the first images circulating of these attacks that reportedly took place in Lebanon. Well, between Lebanon and Israel, they've been hitting each other really hard. We'll be keeping an eye on what's happening, but for now, we're already seeing the buildings that have been affected. It's also known that Hezbollah reportedly launched rockets toward Israel. That's another issue that's drawing attention. The clashes have mainly been taking place in the town of Bine Yebeli in southern Lebanon. This has already been reported by the Lebanese National News Agency, as well as international media outlets that are commenting on this situation. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being here with the whole community, joining us here with Jerez. Let's talk about what's happening in the world. Many thanks as well to the community coming from Jerez's channel. Big greetings to all of you too. And well, let's get into the details of what's happening in the world. Let me just show you this image as well. This is part of an attack that happened in Dini, but these attacks are also drawing attention, Jerez. Terrible attacks, right? Let's go into the details of what's happening. I mean, the conflict has spread, or rather the conflicts have, if we want to get into that, and we'll get to it as we go. What we're seeing there, those are Al-Qaeda fighters entering towns over there in North Africa, trying to operate in border areas, for example, between Burkina Faso. Yes, over there towards Timbuktu. They are operating, taking over a small town. Armed motorcyclists suddenly arrived and, according to reports, are already taking over the area. This is a topic that will have to be analyzed in another live broadcast, but the images obviously are already starting to circulate here, right? People from their windows hiding are sharing a bit of what's happening in those regions of the world. Honestly, it's just amazing. Let's get into the details. Let's get to the news, to what's happening in the world. And well, let's excuse me for a moment. Let's introduce Jerez here. Jerez, how have you been? A huge hello to all the Andalakistas. Jerez, how are you? How have you been?
Very well, Pepe, very well. I'm very happy, as always, to be here with the community, to be able to chat. It's been a while since we recorded. So much has been happening, right? I mean, you just mentioned in broad terms that topic about North Africa, the Sahel area, where things have gotten extremely complicated. This has been going on for several years now. I think that ever since they managed to unite countries and drive ISIS, the Islamic State, out of the Middle East, that's when the route toward Africa opened up and they started to have a lot of trouble there. There's also something I'd like to mention there. I mean, before going into detail, which I think is also linked to the growth these extremist groups are experiencing, jihadists in North Africa. And that's precisely the war between Russia and Ukraine. Because we have to remember that in many areas like the Central African Republic, it was Russia, through the Wagner group, that was in one way or another controlling the situation. And now, with the issue of the strain this war has caused for Russia, they've had to pull back a lot of forces. They're not sending the support they used to send. And this has weakened the governments that in one way or another were working together, so to speak, with Russia. And this makes it possible, given this institutional weakness, well, this makes it possible for these extremist groups to grow. And this is happening in several countries. Mali also has a very complex situation right now. Well, practically the entire Sahel region.
That's right, Jerez. I mean, there's a redistribution of radical groups toward areas of Africa that were previously unthinkable, and they operate, moreover, in a very tribal way. I mean, basically, they're thinking in terms of an approach. What can I tell you, Jerez? I mean, they're basically taking over small villages, gradually absorbing them, and making it so that in the future we could have a large part of Africa extremely radicalized. And it's a problem that, well, I think it caught them by surprise. And besides that, the world has left them alone. I mean, in the case of Syria, since it's a key area, well, it got attention. And what's more, you'll remember, Jerez, that at one point, Russia, the United States, even radical groups like Al Qaeda, for example, working together against ISIS. I mean, it's crazy to say that. And here in the northern part, well, hey, if suddenly some African countries, especially from the north, but also from the south, I mean, if they take them, no other country is going to come in to protect them, right? I mean, they might carry out an operation there from time to time, but let's be honest, they're not going to invest too much in that issue because they don't see it as very important from a geographic and geopolitical point of view.
To me, it even seems like a strategic mistake. Obviously, the parties involved in the conflict also have priorities shaped by each country's interests. However, Africa has a very important value in terms of resources, in terms of human resources as well, not just natural exploitable resources. Eh, and that could be a focal point. The next Middle East could be Africa if it's neglected and if attention isn't paid to it. I think that the countries in this new order that is forming and that we hope will be concluded in the not too distant future, these wars that we are seeing in Iran, the United States, Ukraine, Russia, and other conflicts already in a new reordering, I think much more attention should be paid to Africa, not only on social issues, but also on economic issues of these types of paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups, dictatorial groups, extremist groups. Why? Because the vision of groups like the Islamic State is very clear. They are totally expansionist, and what they ultimately seek is a caliphate that covers the entire globe. So if you let them continue growing and controlling countries where they will acquire significant economic resources and therefore more military power, why? Because they will control the diamonds, they will control the timber, they will control the mining, they will control the gas, they will control all the resources of the countries where they are already gaining some control, just like they did before. It's like what Iran said about oil and the Islamic Guard.
Yes, that's true. I mean, from a strategic point of view, as you mentioned, it could be a mistake. Losing not only a, let's say, almost entirely rural Africa, but also an Africa full of resources, or an Africa that has uranium, that has gold, that has, if you go towards Mozambique and all those areas,
I mean,
if you go to this whole area, this could really become the horn of plenty for the world. Just imagine this being controlled by groups like that. Now, there are also some very interesting reports because from this area, for example, towards Mozambique, the Congo, this whole region, and you see how basically they're facing multiple radical groups, not just ISIS, but other groups right there that want to control each other. On some level, I'm telling you, that's almost tribal. And you see how the farmers themselves, the ranchers, well, they're small ranchers, who have their 10 or 15 little sheep or whatever, but they're armed and they defend themselves however they can. Or they form small groups, kind of like self defense groups, like they call them here in Mexico. They form little self defense groups and they defend themselves among each other because they don't have any other option. I mean, there isn't one.
there's also something that's very complicated, very complex. Africa has been exploited by the West historically. So the fact that the West comes in, I'm not sure how that would be received by the local population. I mean, we have this situation, which is why I talk about a new order. We know that in one way or another it's forming simply because of what we're experiencing. But this new order must include all countries and must include minimum guarantees of rights that should be accepted by all countries. Now, we also need to be careful not to return to neocolonialism. Why? Because we have this background where, especially because of the time period, obviously, but if it hadn't been other countries, well, Europe, France, England, Spain itself, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, they all overexploited this whole area and with a series of incredible abuses. But I think that history obviously breeds suspicion among the population. At least from my point of view, I think it would be a natural reaction. But if on the other side you have the jihadist groups, and if you don't abide by, if you don't submit to Sharia law and to these groups' interpretation of Sharia law, then you're practically condemned to death. I mean, it's a very, very complex situation, and sadly, it gets very little attention. Also, because of the distance, the language, and many other reasons, we don't usually talk about these topics because we get very little information about them.
And then we have, since we're here with the map, we have this area of Israel. Moving a little further north, we have an area where in Israel and Lebanon, as we saw at the beginning of the video, there are clashes happening. But it seems that despite how concerning the Strait of Hormuz is, which we can talk about in a moment if you want, it has become key. This area, where it was just announced a few moments ago that there will no longer be negotiations, the plane simply turned back. The plane that was heading to Pakistan was delayed. It was delayed yesterday. They announced they had left, but at the last minute, it turned out they hadn't. And we talked about that last night. Then the plane that Wilkoff and Jared Kushner were supposed to take takes off, and suddenly they're told, well, they've been ordered to turn back. No, it seems like they want to negotiate. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? What happened first, the confrontation in Lebanon or not? But what is clear is that it's a red line drawn by Iran, in which they say, well, Lebanon is also part of the negotiation. And if Hezbollah is firing at Israel and Israel is obviously firing back at Hezbollah, then clearly there are no possibilities for negotiation. How do you see it? What factor is preventing the negotiations? Is it Lebanon? Is it Hormuz? Is it many other things? What's going on there?
No, look, from the beginning, I think the negotiations had a pessimistic outlook simply because of the red lines set by the United States and the red lines set by Iran. They're simply incompatible. Now, Iran, I think, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which is currently controlling Iran, I think they feel quite secure because of the reactions they've seen in the West and the United States. They have this strategy that was well telegraphed. It would be unreasonable for the United States or Iran not to have foreseen it, which is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and thereby affect the global economy. So I think what they're going to try to do is extend the conflict as much as possible. This period of negotiations, for me, from the beginning, didn't make much sense. Even though we all hope that an agreement can be reached, there don't seem to be any conditions for an agreement. First, because with an agreement, the Ayatollah regime would remain, whether it's the son, the grandson, or whoever they want to put in power, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard would remain, and we would continue to see the same abuses against the population. That's what's important, because one thing is Donald Trump's specific interests and another is the interests of the United States. And it's a very different thing, the reality that millions of Iranians live under a totalitarian dictatorial regime and under religious law. From that point of view, I think it seemed very unlikely that an agreement could be reached. Another party that I don't see benefiting from a peace agreement between the current regime and the United States is Israel, because the one who really sees it as an existential issue, and for me that's how it is Israel. The moment Iran is able to build its atomic bomb, the moment it can rearm or have greater capabilities than it has had, the first one it will attack is Israel, and that's exactly what it wants. I mean, this isn't about theories or conspiracies. It's what the Iranians in power, the Ayatollahs, the Revolutionary Guard have always told us. It's nothing new. So no es especular. It's not that Iran might attack. They've been saying they will. After Iran, who comes next? Sorry, after Israel, the entire West would be next. Because again, these are government projects based on a religion that, in their view, is completely imperialist, completely expansionist. That's why Iran spent decades funding Hamas, funding Hezbollah, funding Shia groups in Iraq, funding the Sufis, and a large number of dissident Shia groups that in other countries have their own paramilitary activities and are trying in one way or another to come to power. The most well-known and clearest examples, because they did it not only through armed means but also politically, are obviously Hezbollah and Hamas.
We have to remember, Giles, Shiism in the United States, for example, I mean, and in Europe too, clearly. So I say this is a topic that,
We also have to distinguish Shiism from Shiite radicalism.
but they're no, not at all. But they're there. I mean, they're there, right? And you see how there are protests in the United States, in New York, with images of the Ayatollah. I mean, defending this person or defending him in Europe, of course. They're, if you want minorities or whatever. Well, yes, it's just that they're spread out. And there will be people who really do it out of belief and not so much because they want to cause harm or anything like that. Yes, but anyway, you can see how they start to influence and spread in that sense. You also have to look at it from the other point of view. And in Iran, unlike other countries like North Korea, and this, well, there has been, let's say, Western culture spreading among Iranians themselves because they've had access to the internet, because they've been very connected. And well, that's also another way of expanding. So it's very clear that Iran is no longer what it was in the 70s. And even in the 70s, it had already become quite westernized.
Look, before the Ayatollah arrived, Iran was the most westernized country in the Middle East. I mean, and with a pretty good quality of life. And compared to what it was at that time, of course, they had their problems, especially issues with corruption. I compare the arrival of the Ayatollah to a similar case in Venezuela. Venezuela before Chavez faced major corruption issues, yes. But it was a country that was growing. It was the economic powerhouse of Latin America, obviously because of oil, but obviously this created inequalities. And those inequalities, when you see that there's a sector getting very rich, some legitimately, others through corruption, well, there's a large part of the population that's really pissed off. Why? Because there's a clear, obvious, and often blatant inequality. So what happens is that someone comes along with a speech saying that now there will be distribution for everyone, a lot of talk about corruption. That's also something very real. And well, people end up buying into that narrative. And that's also something you can see very clearly. Hugo Chavez, for example, concentrates all the power until he becomes a dictator. The same thing happens in Iran. I mean, in Iran, the problem with the Shah was corruption. The problem with the Shah was that there was a lot of inequality, which there was, an impressive economic growth compared to other years. But at the end of the day, you had a lot of internal problems, social problems because of these sharp differences, because there wasn't even a minimally fair distribution. I'm not talking about socialism or communism, but about creating the basic or necessary conditions for fairness, not equality. That's not just basic.
Hey, Jerez, and changing the subject, but still in the same area, obviously, because there's a lot to talk about and we need to go over it point by point. In Hormuz, it's apparently the strongest global trump card, so to speak. And we're not talking about what we're seeing in Lebanon, but now let's move toward this Hormuz area because just like you were saying today, what was going to happen was pretty much expected in many ways. Well, if anything was expected, it was precisely that this was going to happen because let's be honest, it had been determined for a long time that Hormuz was a risk, that Hormuz could be a problem. Multiple bases were created in the area, but now it has been shown that these were bases meant for deterrence, not bases truly intended to sustain a direct armed conflict, but rather bases designed for deterrence. Here I am, and don't you dare touch me. But when it comes down to reality, strategically speaking, and we've received a lot of reports from the soldiers who were in the area, when those arrangements were made, let's say, did they know that this distance is too small to maintain a base, especially when you have this area full of mountains and this area that's practically flat? You might ask, how do you attack them in the mountains? Here, it's easy because you're exposed and in plain sight. So that's an issue that now Iran has realized was possible to do, and now it's going to be complicated for them to let it go. Do you think at some point the Strait of Hormuz will be opened with the current regime? Or do you think there's no other option but for the regime to eventually fall for that to happen? The Strait of Hormuz to be opened?
I think a long-term war is coming, and I don't think the current regime will be allowed to stay in power. It won't be allowed because of the influence Israel has in the United States. Now, I also think knowing such a shady character as Donald Trump, what Donald Trump is seeing, at least that's what I think, and that's why he's making this bet, or at least what he publicly says about the agreement, is because of the November elections. I mean, I've mentioned this before. For me, the conflict is going to escalate much more. Next year, the year when there are no elections for Donald Trump, the year when it no longer depends on what will happen in the midterms, the year when he will already know clearly whether he has a Congress in his favor or a Congress against him. And I think that Israel, from its perspective and for obvious survival interest, also has the idea of not letting this go. Now, there are other factors that have played a role, such as Saudi Arabia, and there are other interests in the Gulf countries that believe the Iranian regime must be exterminated. I mean, that's why the reaction of the Iranian regime is also natural. And on the other hand, that's what makes it even more complex. And that's why I do believe it's going to be a long-term war. It's that for these extremist groups, those who truly believe in this religious narrative, well, for them, martyrdom is a blessing. I mean, it's really not like you're going to scare them by saying, I'm going to kill you. It's very, very different from the worldview we have, and that makes it even more dangerous. So in conclusion to that part, I think this is going to drag on now, just like what happened in Russia after 2 months. Every day that goes by is a defeat for the United States, just like in Russia after 2 months. Every day that goes by is a defeat for Russia. I mean,
Exactly. Sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
for me, I mean, right now the United States is losing. Why? Because they couldn't solve in 2 months what they had to solve in 2 months. If you couldn't wipe them out at that moment, every day that passes is a defeat, even if in the end you win the war, even if in the end you achieve your goal and manage to wipe out this regime. Right now, every day is a defeat. Why? Because all of that, being the greatest military power with these grandiose announcements from Donald Trump, well, they're just empty words. Because in the end, the regime remains. Hey, you really messed it up. You took away a big part of its power. You eliminated all the leaders. Yes, but they're still there. They're still there exercising control over the population.
They're still there, and now it's even the more radical ones. There it is. In fact, they did a favor for the Revolutionary Guard because even though it had been obvious for months that they had power, now they're the only ones in control. The more moderate line is out now, and now they have control of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, that's it.
I have to disagree on that. I think that in the interests of both Israel and the United States, it's better for the Revolutionary Guard to be in charge right now and not the moderate wing. Why? Because it's more likely that they will raise the stakes. It's more likely that they will start taking actions, and that will give you more legitimacy when you have to deploy forces, when you have to be held accountable. I mean, that's the distinction, and that's why democracies are important in contrast to dictatorships.
But they're doing the God a favor. They're doing the God a favor because in the end, the God wanted power. Now, well, that's it.
One way or another, with the Revolutionary Guard coming to power, or openly, since they are now the ones controlling the country, because this has been happening since before the oil companies, for example.
And it shows that their strategy is working. They can say whatever they want. Hey, Israel is very powerful in this, and it's the United States too. But which strategy is actually working? Where is the uranium? The Iranians still have it. The regime is still there. So what's changed? Did you weaken them? Well, let's see what this Tulsi Gabbard, the director of intelligence, says. What does she say when they ask her? Hey, so how is the regime? She says it's weak, but it's intact. That tells you everything. I mean, now I do agree that the only way out for the United States right now, and Israel understands this perfectly, is to end the regime. That's why Israel Katz came out 2 days ago to say that at this point we're already ready to resume operations. I mean, we're just waiting for the green light to start attacking the leaders again. I mean, they've already been located. Where are the next leaders they're going to attack? Generals, possibly Moshtaba Hamini. I mean, I really think a lot of these people have their days numbered. Honestly, I mean, because it's been shown that they're heavily infiltrated, or the Revolutionary Guard has been infiltrated for many years and they still haven't figured out how, but they're infiltrated. So, it don't. I think it's just a matter of time unless suddenly the United States starts to back off starts to pull back, which I find difficult because then what are you going to sell? Like you said, in the midterm elections?
That was the dangerous part. The thing is, Donald Trump is desperate for a victory right now. He's desperate for a victory. The question is, where will he get it? Because he could pull it off in Cuba right now. He could shift the narrative by going into Cuba, removing Diaz-Canel, handing him over, and claiming we've ended another dictatorship. So people stop focusing on Iran. I think Donald Trump's strategy, his in particular, not the militaries, not intelligence, etc. Donald Trump's plan is to be able to pause the conflict until after November. I don't think that's possible. I think something that could also happen maybe is to carry out attacks like the ones in June again. But you know that the Iranian response is going to force you to have a greater presence. I do believe that they will end up sending troops, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow. I think it will be until next year, solely due to the electoral issue. We have to remember something. Donald Trump cannot lose power, and he cannot lose power because he has a series of crimes for which they can get him without any problem. Bruno mentioned that to me recently during our conversation. I was telling him about the impeachment theory that could be brought against Donald Trump, especially because of the market manipulation he has done as president through his tweets. And that's been clearly demonstrated by things like the Polymarket case. He told me, no, they're not going to impeach him. But no, let's see if the Democrats win. No, son, why would they impeach him? If he's causing chaos, it's better to let him keep making a mess and secure the election, right? In 3 years, my love, if you do the impeachment, then someone more moderate comes in and gets things back on track. But there are a lot of things.
Yes, besides that, they would play the victim and that could work for them in certain sectors. Let's go to this question. Gire, let's go with this point. Allow me. So, do you want to ask a question, Perla? Well, regarding what you mentioned, to make this matter clearer, do you think that with this cancellation of negotiations, attacks between both countries will start in the coming days? How do you see this matter?
I don't think it will happen immediately. I believe that both the United States and Iran are also looking to rearm, to reorganize themselves, and so on. But for me, the main actor here is neither Iran nor the United States, it's Israel. I think that with Israel's intelligence, what they will seek, as soon as it's declared that these negotiations are over, as soon as there's the first sign of movement, is to carry out attacks, even like the ones we saw before the conflict started, openly targeting the elimination of Israel's priority targets. Unlike the United States, I think Israel has some of the best intelligence out there. I think they have invested in it very well and have been very effective. That has been demonstrated throughout their history. And in that sense, I do think the attacks will resume, although not immediately. Now, the United States has another big problem. What do you do about Europe? I mean, it was foolish of Donald Trump to be constantly fighting with all his allies and to believe that you wouldn't need them later. And to be able to handle a conflict of this magnitude with the potential to expand anywhere, because we don't know how it could develop. There are many ways this conflict could end. It's necessary to have support, at least narrative support, at least rhetorical support from Europe, which is your great ally, from Canada, which is your neighbor, the one that has always supported you. But instead, Donald Trump, with this populism, has dedicated himself to attacking all his allies. And obviously, he lets go of Voltaire and says, why the heck should I get involved? I think something is happening like what happened in the world wars, but the other way around. We have to remember that the United States joined the war at the end. I mean, the United States arrived when it was already at the end.
At the end, exactly.
Russia was the one that really fought hard against the Germans, because the Germans, first of all, didn't respect the Molotov agreement they had between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. When that agreement was broken, remember, they were allies with a non-aggression pact and invaded Poland together. So when that agreement was broken and Hitler, in his mind, thought he could go ahead and invade Russia, one problem, and he could have done it except for the winter, which is what stopped him. Russia was the one that, one way or another, secured victory over the Nazis. The United States only comes in at the end and demonstrates its power with the use of nuclear bombs.
Hey, Giles, amid
Ajá.
dentro de in all this tug of war that's going on, there's also the part about the isolation that the United States is imposing on itself, a self-isolation that has cut itself off from Europe, has basically separated itself from its neighbors, from the United States, from Canada, and from Mexico. The isolation is reaching very extreme levels. And the strangest thing about all this is that, well, that isolation had been stated very clearly because he himself had said it during his campaign. I mean, it's not something new. But what stands out is that many Republicans, even MAGA, are starting to turn their backs on Donald Trump. I mean, turning their backs to the point that big influencers, super MAGA, who were basically fanatics, right? I mean, it's no longer a matter of analysis or even thinking about it because you can differentiate between fanaticism. Everyone can be a fanatic if they want to or not, or just knowing about it. And within a community, there are also thoughtful groups among the Republicans who analyze things and don't buy into everything, right? Who really think and say, wait, this isn't what you promised us. This is exactly the opposite of what you promised. Aside from all your acts of corruption that are pretty well documented, estás yéndote. Well, let's turn to the wing you criticize the most. In fact, even making moves like the cannabis issue, the issue of psychotropics and all that, which you used to criticize so much in the past and now, well, you're open to it. So has he been betraying what he promised? And at the same time, the people who think, the people who really analyze within these Republican groups have said, we're not going to buy it from you. Whatever you're selling or everything you do, because obviously it's not what was promised. And no matter what your name is or what you've said or done, if you don't deliver, we're not going to support you. And they go to someone else. I mean, they go to others, to other people. So this part, strategically speaking, well, what I think, what is happening, what Tom is doing right now is looking for what you mentioned, not Cuba, but looking for this, well, betting again on the topic. Exactly.
Thank you. I mean, look, first of all, Donald Trump is a populist in every sense of the word. It's not a phenomenon exclusive to the left. It's something that happens across the entire political spectrum, where basically populism is about using reductionist language and offering simple answers to complex problems. That's how I put it in very basic terms. What's being tested right now in the United States, the institutional capacity of a state. Donald Trump, and he himself has said it in his comments or has hinted at it. He dreams of being an autocrat. He doesn't believe in the separation of powers or in checks and balances. We see constant attacks on the court. We see his attacks, his constant attacks on the media that disagree with him or question him. We see constant attacks on any kind of checks and balances, whether it's in Congress, even if it's civil, or governors who are not aligned with his vision of how things should be governed. That's why what's at stake, and so far the institutions have been able to withstand it. You mentioned it very well yesterday with the issue of tariffs. I think it's a great example of how the institutions are still above the president. Now he is the supreme commander of the armed forces. And these aren't just any armed forces. That's another problem. I see a very, very complex scenario in the United States. It's been going on for a while. And looking into the future a bit, what worries me even more than someone like Donald Trump, that the pendulum swings to the other side and a new president comes in who wants to do the exact opposite of Donald Trump simply because he's Donald Trump. Because at the end of the day, there are things Donald Trump has done, like any politician, that are actually good and were necessary. I mean, the issue of Venezuela seems to me to be one of his greatest achievements, and it's something we should thank Trump for. Let's hope that in the medium term, a new democracy can be strengthened or created in Venezuela, that institutions can be established. It's not going to be a short-term issue. We said that back in January in our first impressions. It's going to be a process, as Marco Rubio announced, with 4 phases, and he explained more or less what they were about. Obviously, the Venezuelan regime will do everything possible to prevent this from happening, but there is a very significant advance there. the issue of Iran was also necessary. Maybe no other president would have dared to do it, but why? If you didn't do it today, you couldn't do it tomorrow. Let's see. And the threat? No, it's not a conspiracy theory. The threat has been public. I mean, they themselves tell you, as soon as I can, I'll come and wipe you out. Because the little Satan is Israeli, you are the great Satan. And they are the enemies of God. So we have to wipe them off the face of the earth. I mean, dude, you can't allow someone, a country to be controlled by someone with that kind of mindset.
And look, guys, just a pause there then. Could it be, guys, from what we're experiencing right now, right? A group, let's say a theocratic Iran, that is extremist in that sense. They don't hide it. They've said as part of their own ideology week after week that they want to destroy the West, they want to destroy the United States, they want to destroy Israel. Can you negotiate with a radical regime, or is it then if you can't negotiate, right? So then what are they doing going to Pakistan supposedly to negotiate? It's the same thing. Maybe they're just stalling, huh?
They're buying time, and for various reasons. What I do believe, no, look, we have to remember that the United States almost carried out almost a purge under Pete Hegseth. Anyone who didn't agree one way or another, they forced them into early retirement or found a way to push them aside. What does this mean? That you have a presidential figure, a supreme commander of the armed forces, who doesn't take no for an answer. And we've seen it in other areas as well. We've seen it with countless officials, only those, there's been a campaign that's been made, a big campaign. He keeps those by his side and those who say no to him. That's the role of an advisor, to tell your president, hey, you're wrong, and that's going to turn out badly for you. I believe Donald Trump is miscalculating, especially given his personality. He claims we'll be done with Iran in 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe he never fully grasped it. You have religious fanatics who think that martyrdom is a blessing and that paradise awaits them. If they are killed in a holy war, which for them is a holy war, it's part of their jihad. You have a fairly large and complex area on the ground. You have an army, which is the Revolutionary Guard, that has been preparing for this for decades. You have a way in which they operate as autonomous cells where they don't need a hierarchical leadership structure to keep operating. You have a pretty big division between the civilian political leadership and the military side, to the point that they even made fun of Aragachi. I don't think Donald Trump ever saw that or wanted to. Maybe he wasn't informed, or maybe his ego just assumed, as the United States, he could do whatever he wanted and others would be scared. Well, no, it doesn't work like that. So does that mean Iran can resist indefinitely? No, right? It depends on what happens in the next few years, which is why I think this will unfortunately continue for much longer. Now it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the rest of the countries. The countries from the bloc haven't intervened so far, even though legally they could have, because they've been constantly attacked.
That's what I was getting at. Look, we have to remember, and we talked about it last night, Saudi Arabia was the straw that broke the camel's back. When the Minister of Defense, who is the brother of the Crown Prince, tells Donald Trump in a meeting in Washington, he says, we believe this is the moment to attack Iran. And with the idea, not the idea that the regime will finally end once and for all because it's completely weakened, but not because of intelligence. It's weakened because the population is protesting and because they just eliminated thousands of protesters. And people are fed up, they're angry, I don't know what else. So, does this happen because Saudi Arabia made that move? A la hora de que Iran attacks Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, even Amman, even Turkey. You say, how is it possible that no country responds? There are videos of supposed missiles launched from Kuwait, which, well, I don't know about this topic, but officially, publicly, they never attacked. Maybe they did launch some things here and there, I don't doubt it, but officially they didn't attack. And besides, there weren't any planes seen flying over Iran from Saudi Arabia, things like that. That's something that really catches my attention. Jerez, how do you see it?
The theory would be that it's the fear of a much bigger escalation. Which, by the way, is something I've been saying for months. what Iran wants is for the situation to escalate as much as possible so that China gets involved, so that Russia gets involved, so that everyone gets involved. And now they can say, well, I'm not alone anymore. Now there are several of us and I can stir things up for you. I mean, I can hold my ground here in my own land, but also I can take care of issues for you in Europe. I can take care of issues in Latin America, even inside the United States. But the big confrontation, well, let it be with China and Russia. That would force and put Europe in a pretty critical situation, which is the part where both the Europeans and the Gulf countries have been very cautious. Do the Europeans have a stronger reason or a solid argument not to get involved? One, Donald Trump, you have treated us poorly. You have come to offend us. You have come to mock us. You have come to pressure us. You have practically come to break relations with most European countries, at least the Gulf countries. It's different because they are actually being attacked. However, it's about knowing how many extremist Shiites there might be in Saudi Arabia, how many extremist Shiites there might be in each of these countries. And the other thing is, if this escalates, what condition will I be in? I mean, how long did it take for Europe to recover after a global conflict? If the global conflict happens in the Middle East, then what will happen to Qatari development? What will happen to the development of Oman? What will happen to Saudi Arabia's development? Because either way, with dictatorial regimes, because we shouldn't forget that they are also dictatorships, they have had impressive economic growth and have become tourist and investment hubs, as well as centers for money laundering. Incredible. They are the new Switzerland, and all this prosperity that's being generated could get out of hand for them. Precisely if this conflict escalates, I think that's a pretty good reason to think twice, maybe 3 times. And then you have a player that is one of the biggest military powers, which is Turkey, that publicly and openly is against Israel. And you say, let's see, how would Turkey react if
but that Turkey is trying to get attention at all costs. He didn't want to respond or criticize Iran, even though they attacked him 3 or 4 times with ballistic missiles, and their systems had to be deployed to defend NATO systems to defend the US base that's in Turkey. And at all costs, they insisted that they knew basically that the attack wasn't coming from Iran, something like that. I mean, it seemed like they were implying that, at least in this, but obviously it was the Iranians. And well, it shows a very cunning Erdogan. He always has been. I mean, he's a very cunning person. Saying first, this isn't my war. No, yesterday, no. A few days ago, they started putting out propaganda images, military stuff like all countries do, right? With ultra modern systems and very spectacular images. No, saying, and they put up, we are not Iran. I mean, kind of implying that if anyone messes with them, obviously NATO would obviously be weighing this issue right now, but that's it. Exactly. I mean, because this attack, well, officially is literally an attack with ballistic missiles on a NATO country, and NATO said, no, no, it's nothing, no, and they didn't want to get involved in the issue. I mean, because this could have been the excuse to say, but
I think it had to be requested,
thing.
which Erdogan isn't going to do.
But there's also the issue of Cyprus, which draws attention, this attack, and the hybrid war that is also within NATO's rules.
We're seeing it with Russia. No, they've also avoided it as much as possible. I mean, I think NATO's attitude is reasonable up to a point, given the danger of this escalating. 1, 2, you need to rearm, as all countries are already announcing their rearmament. So is NATO not prepared to face a large-scale war? At least that's how it seems, simply because of the rearmament announcements they're making. In that regard, Donald Trump was absolutely right when he said, hey, you guys aren't contributing anything. I mean, they're relying on the myth that the United States is invincible and that no one is going to do anything to them because we're allies, but they also have to do their part. It's very important to analyze not just the people based on whether we like them or not, or judge them as good or bad, but to look at each issue individually. Now, there's a possibility of a proxy war that I see coming from Turkey against Israel, which is the issue of Somalia and Somaliland. Turkey has invested a lot in Somalia and has put a lot of effort into reorganizing the Somali army And that's something that hardly anyone talks about. And what's the importance between Somalia and Somaliland? The other strait, I mean, just like there's the Strait of Hormuz.
What you're saying was going in that direction to see how the conflict could spread. Are you telling me there's one there? How the conflict could spread and what would happen if, let's say, suddenly they say, well, you know what, we didn't want to say it, but here we have, aquí tenemos a nuclear weapon. I mean, that they suddenly say this has already been announced. How do you view the conflict possibly spreading to North Africa, Europe, or Eastern Europe? We must remember its potential impact on Europe, especially Eastern Europe. Well, the issue of radicalism has increased a lot, specifically religious radicalism and all of that. So, how do you see that issue?
Look, to me, what happens in the other strait seems fundamental. The next war I see is that Israel is recognizing and supporting Somaliland, and Turkey is reorganizing and rearming Somalia. What does that mean? That if the Yemenis attack the base and want to put the Israelis in Somaliland, then the Somali side will already have the means to defend itself without the need for a broader confrontation. In the hypothetical case that Iran comes out and declares that it already has nuclear weapons, I think that really no one would believe them because they would have already used it. And the other possibility is even worse. Or if you already have it, I'll launch it at you first. That's Israel. I don't think Netanyahu wants to or plans to have a change of heart. Another very different escalation. Then there's the war, which is hardly talked about anymore, but it's still ongoing. There are two. Does it involve India and Pakistan? Pakistan is a nuclear power, and Pakistan has a defense agreement with Saudi Arabia. That too. At the time, it really set off alarms for me when Iran attacked BIA, because that already gave Pakistan the possibility to say, hey, well, I'll get involved too, right?
Exactly.
And it's not just any country. Sometimes I think we really underestimate certain countries. Pakistan is an extremely advanced militarized country, and it's a nuclear power, however you want to look at it. India as well.
We have to remember that exactly they are neighbors, and India and Pakistan are similar in many ways, even though they see themselves as totally divided and separate cultures.
It's always the English, right?
It's the English always.
It was a unipolar country. It's just that someone in England was the one who drew the dividing line, and that caused the massacre of millions of people. Yes.
Yes, it was really tough.
On the Pakistan side, it was the Muslim part, and on the other side, it was the Hindu part.
You go to Kashmir, you go to their entire border, you go to the Afghanistan side, where they also have problems with Afghanistan. I mean, Pakistan right now. And Pakistan is also moving closer to China, so to speak. I mean, it has a good relationship with everyone, and they've been very smart about that. But they have a great relationship with China because in the end, China also has its problems with India. So, has the relationship been great for the Chinese and the Pakistanis, and now having a huge corridor through Pakistan and a port that, by the way, is already built and already operational? Let's say I bring all the products from China and I skip all the other countries I would have to go through and deal with. So, as for the Philippines, I'd say it's not the complete solution to the problems that area poses for China, but it does help them in that sense. So it's North Africa, the Middle East, which already covers Asia and Europe and Eastern Europe as well. Well, it's a conflict, that's why, even more than the one between Ukraine and Russia, this specific conflict is so volatile and so problematic on a global level. Besides that, you see it even in the community comments, it kind of stirs up passions, like a classic soccer match between teams. Entre equipos. Let's say Madrid, Barcelona, Madrid, Barcelona. And at the end of the day, we're talking about the world and we're talking about groups pues sí, que representan radicalismos in both senses. And yes, there will be a religious radical, but there are also radicals in politics and also radicals in other areas. I mean, let's be clear, radicalism is not just religious. And it's
just as dangerous. Let's see, the king, what has he seen? As long as he has power, he's extremely dangerous. And when he doesn't have it, that's when you have to root him out precisely so he doesn't gain power.
Perla made an interesting comment earlier, an opinion, I think. She said she felt, let me try to recall it accurately since her comment is pretty far up now. But she said something like she feels that the conflicts have the goal of ending democracies. What do you think about that? I found the comment interesting.
Democracies are in crisis all over the world. Yeah, I mean, totally. Let's see. We have countries where there are more and more encroachments on the judiciary, more attacks from the executive branches, and we have executives who are increasingly seeking a greater concentration of power. There are even many politicians right now, for example, with the election in Peru, who were openly proposing to nationalize the central bank. Peru's only advantage has been the central bank's incredible ability to maintain economic stability despite political instability.
Their economy keeps growing.
It's incredible.
How can they ask for that?
Because it's narrative. Well, that's when the narrative of sovereignty, of nationalism starts, the pattern of that very moment. It's a very emotional way to reach people, you see. Few people understand it. I don't claim to understand it myself. About how a central bank really works. I understand its importance. I understand the basics.
And that it has to be independent and that it has to be...
No, totally, because of the danger that you might use it for your public policies to win elections and stay in power now, because it's important. The attacks against the judiciary, and we saw it. Remember, before it started, before October 7th, there were protests in Israel because Netanyahu wanted to carry out a judicial reform. Precisely to weaken it and have more power within the executive, I mean, to eliminate that counterbalance. The judiciary, by its nature, is to protect the citizen from the executive branch. They are natural counterbalances. I mean, they were designed and created so that there would be an impartial referee. Among the differences between the citizen, I mean, the private individual, because you, me, and anyone who is not the government is the private sector. We are the private individuals, and the public sector, which is the government, which is the state. Why do we need protection from the state? Because the state has the monopoly on violence. You and I can't go and beat someone up. The state can do it within a legal framework. That's why you have police. That's why you have the military. So since they have a monopoly on violence, this separation of powers is created to provide checks and balances. And what's happening right now is that you have figures like Javier Milei, who seeks to concentrate power with a narrative myth that is quite popular, quite emotional, and he has managed to reach a specific sector of the population that is the majority in the elections. Why is it so accessible to populists? Because we have extremely corrupt governments everywhere, because governments, one way or another, are not going to be able to solve your problems overnight, and it's very easy to be the opposition that's criticizing everything. But when you come to power, you realize that it's not so easy, and your whole speech starts to fall apart. You don't solve the Chiapas conflict in 5 minutes, like Fox used to say, so that myth falls apart, and then others can point that out. Now, when you realize that you're not going to fulfill what you're promising, how do you stay in power? By co-opting the electoral authorities, weakening the judiciary, controlling Congress, and controlling the military. That is the destruction of democracies. And this is textbook. There's a book, in fact, I don't know if he won the Nobel, not for literature, but I think for economics, I'm not sure which prize he won, which is called How Democracies Die. And with many examples, it basically gives you the step-by-step manual on how democracies are destroyed to become either illiberal democracies, like in the case of Hungary, for example, which just had an election, and Hungary is not a liberal democracy, but it's not a dictatorship either. It's clearly not a dictatorship since Orban accepted the result, even though it was a fundamental mistake. He's a guy who thinks in a similar way, right, in Orban's party. They're not that different, except for certain very important points, but those points are what make the difference. Or can you just go straight to a dictatorship, like in the case of Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez, after the attempted coup, came to power democratically and won? I mean, look, there's no doubt about that. And he also won the second election again. And what did Hugo Chavez start to do? A new constitution, changing the electoral rules, starting to control the military. How do you control the military? Well, you give them construction, you give them, what's it called? The oil company, that's the name. No, not this one. Petrobras is from Brazil. PBS starts putting more military against PBS. You start taking the military and putting them in civilian positions. So with that, you have control over the military, you have control over the electoral process. That way you can prevent the case from happening. Maria Corina Machado, we have to remember that Edmundo Gonzalez becomes a candidate not because he volunteered or because he had a following, but because the Electoral Institute of Venezuela did not allow Maria Corina Machado to register.
Exactly. Hey guys, since we're touching on topics here in Latin America, there's a very interesting topic about an incident that happened in Chihuahua where several people lost their lives in an accident. Among them were Mexican agents, but also CIA agents. I'm not sure if you want to explore that topic, which I find very interesting.
There was an operation that took place in Chihuahua. It's an operation involving the Army, the National Guard, and the state public security. They seize and dismantle an 800 square meter warehouse that was a drug lab. Imagine the scale. A drug lab is usually a small room. Here you're talking about an 800 square meter warehouse. A very successful operation. Everything went perfectly. Is the United States ambassador the one who will be informed about this? That 2 members of the embassy died in a car accident along with 2 members of the state forces. 4 people died. Shortly after, the next day, the rumor started that they were CIA agents. That's where I got lost. Yesterday, I was out of the loop. I don't know if it has already been confirmed. The Washington Post was the one who made it known, and then everyone started picking it up, and it was taken as a fact. I don't doubt that they are CIA agents, but I don't have any evidence to confirm that they really are. What would happen with the political side, which is where everything became a total mess and was used for political maneuvering? First of all, the president of Mexico says, I didn't know about the presence of other people and we have nothing to do with it. They shouldn't have been there. And that memo they had from the state forces, well, they shouldn't have done that either. And the prosecutor of Chihuahua starts to fall into a series of contradictions. First, he says they were personnel who were training them in the use of drones. Then he says they did participate, but from a distance in the operation. And then he says they asked him for a ride early in the morning because they had to go to the airport. Does that make you suspicious? 3 versions exist, but they're unrelated. I can see the first 2 making sense, but the last one seems ridiculous to me. And then Morena goes, and in the Senate, they present a motion to summon the governor of Chihuahua and the attorney general of Chihuahua to appear. But in their own style, they don't call it a hearing because they don't have the authority or powers to do that. They call it an invitation, a cordial invitation to participate in a working group, making it clear there are no consequences or assumptions if they don't attend. This resolution is presented on Tuesday during the Senate session. Many senators, we don't have the authority as the Senate for that. It violates the Constitution because we are a federal republic. Federal means that we have free and sovereign states that are self-determined and that the central power cannot be above the state powers. I can't call him to account, I as the federal Congress, because the Constitution forbids me to do so. I mean, it's totally illegal and outside of any logical or legal reasoning, not political, because that's different since next year there are elections for governor in Chihuahua. So it goes to committee. At first, I found it very strange and amusing, and I think the hearing will take place on Tuesday. I think the governor and National Action Party have an ace up their sleeve, maybe a signature from someone in the military or something like that. Or I don't know what nonsense they're thinking, because first of all, and they clearly said that if he comes, there's nothing, that nothing should have anything. I mean, if it seemed like the plan said, I mean, they pointed out what's wrong since they don't have the authority, but now they're happy for him to come and explain to them. That really catches my attention.
That reaction. It makes me wonder, what is it that you're showing? What's happening? See?
I mean, I think there's an opposition from Sedena. Let's see, the headquarters shouldn't have known, and why? Because the element of the headquarters in
The United States is saying it too. The United States clearly says that the president knows, the military knows. I mean, they know perfectly well that they're operating. And in fact, the president at one point even comments that, yes, there are agents operating here. So it gets to a point where you say, well, she just threw it all out there. So, sovereignty and all that. But the point is that they are operating and there is collaboration and it's necessary, not just with the United States, but with many countries. They collaborate in various ways from the start. For example, if you know the precursors come from China, you need to work with them and ask them to control it there. And in the end, you have to try to solve that problem, which, by the way, right now, the biggest drug problem is no longer fentanyl. It's moving towards other chemicals like this elephant tranquilizer they use. I don't know if you've heard of it. I can't remember what it's called right now. It's something really crazy. But anyway, the point is that first there is an operation. The government knows about it perfectly well. Well,
Lo perdió el Mencho.
and in fact, they mention it. They mention the Mencho issue. So these operations have actually been going on for a while now. On one hand, it was necessary for them to be done. They're being carried out. But for those who are friends from other countries, suddenly the internal narrative is about having agents operating here against the issue of drug trafficking. There are sectors that don't see it in a good light.
So the reason is that the narrative Morena is selling is the complete opposite. It's openly anti-American rhetoric, it's an openly jingoistic discourse, and it's a sovereigntist discourse. There's something that catches my attention, and I understand it from an electoral logic, but it seems to me that there's a bit of hope with Claudia Sheinbaum because she seems more and more neoliberal in her actions, even if her discourse says otherwise. She's discussing fracking, claiming it would be sustainable, but that's not possible.
She's already talking. It's still fracking. I mean, it still has an environmental impact.
No, it's not sustainable. He's already talking about public-private partnerships, even though they changed the name. That's part of the euphemisms I was telling you about with their presence in Mexico.
I think it dropped. You got disconnected, Gires. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Hola. I think so. It dropped. It disconnected, Gires. We'll see if you.
You got disconnected, Gears?
The last minute.
I was telling you. I don't know where I left off, but basically in the previous broadcast, the active FBI agents from the United States who were in Mexico were expelled. At the time, it was something that was heavily criticized because when you have a policy of hugs, not bullets for the cartels, and then you expel law enforcement, the FBI, the CIA, I mean, my eyes light up. With Claudia Sheinbaum, they allow US agents and the FBI to come back in for Operation Claudia Sheinbaum. She has a big problem. On one hand, the rhetoric continues and she has to maintain it for her voters with a patriotic and anti-Yankee message and all that. But in reality, she's already doing different things. Now, I think that's where the political strategy of the PAN and the governor of Chihuahua comes in. Either they're out of their minds or they're too naive, or they think that with a simple speech, they're going to get away from the issue. Or they're going to bring out a document and say, look, here's where Sedina was notified as the law states, so there shouldn't be any problem. Why? Because this is done not only in Chihuahua, but practically in all the states where there are major conflicts with drug trafficking. Again, there's the issue of Mencho, where there was direct involvement from the United States. There's the issue of the plane that landed in Toluca. At first, it was denied and blamed on artificial intelligence, then admitted the plane arrived, but claimed it was only passing through. Here, the problem for the governor, on the other hand, is that if there really was no notification to the federal government and the federal government didn't authorize it, then yes, it's a crime, it's a serious crime. Now, what should happen in that case? The local Congress should summon both the prosecutor and the governor to appear, since the local Congress does have the authority. Now, Prosecutor Jose.
Sorry, to sum it up for those of us who aren't lawyers, Gires. So in the simplest terms, let's see, it might be legal, but it's not being done legally. So right now. So all of this right now.
We don't know.
We don't know. Okay.
Because right now, those are the versions given by the federal government and the state government. And honestly, I don't believe either of them. We've seen them many times.
Assuming then that it wasn't legal, assuming things weren't done right, what are the consequences?
They can remove her from office through a proceeding called a desafuero against the governor and the prosecutor.
Okay.
The prosecutor is directly responsible, but the governor is politically responsible. Even if she wasn't the one who gave the order, as the head of the executive, she has political responsibility. And it is the local Congress that must carry out what is called a proceeding called a desafuero, which is actually a juicio de procedencia. A literal trial is held, but in Congress, the evidence is presented. It is determined if there is responsibility, and if there is, removal from office would apply. So it's not a minor issue, but it is quite a serious matter. Now, on the political side, what happened in the Senate was simply a circus. And I'm very concerned about how the ruling party is using the term treason against the country over and over again. It's treason, it's treason. Take the time, and I recommend this to everyone. Don't just believe me. Look up information about political prisoners in Cuba, political prisoners in Nicaragua, political prisoners in Venezuela. And what is the crime? Treason against the homeland. I mean, it's a topic, a term so subjective that it's used precisely for political persecution. And accusing a governor of treason against the homeland from the federal legislature is not a small thing. This is something that should worry us, along with everything else that's happening around us. But this is not a minor issue, neither what the governor did, if she actually did it as it's being presented, nor what's happening in the Senate and in the federal government. Just look at the propaganda accounts. There's already a campaign against the governor, accusing them of treason. Be very careful with the terms. I mean, language matters. It matters a lot. Language creates realities. On the other hand, regarding what happened in the Senate, I think the only one who, well, there were two contributions that seemed decent to me, those of Luis Donaldo Colosio and Claudia Anaya. In what sense? Look, we don't have the authority. What we have to do where we do have authority is to summon the head of the Defense Ministry, the head of the Immigration Department, and the head of the National Guard, so that they come and explain to us, because it's not the state government that controls entry into the country. It's the Immigration Institute and the Foreign Ministry. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has the embassy's list of which active personnel the United States has in Mexico. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has that, and they would have to come and say, oh yes, we have them registered, or no, we don't have them registered. Here, legality doesn't matter, and truth is the least important thing. Here, what matters is to gain political advantage. And what both the ruling party and the PAN have been doing is trying to gain political advantage with this issue. The ruling party accuses them of betraying the country, saying they're violating the nation's integrity. And that's exactly what they said, just like some senators did. Isn't it that they surely want to target our movement? And that's why the CIA is operating, because that's how they overthrow governments that aren't pro-United States. Dude, it's the Senate, but with their own. If you say it in a bar, I'll buy it. Here, in a conversation on YouTube. But that's the Senate. That kind of mentality, language, and beliefs are extremely dangerous. And on the other hand, what does the PAN say? Well, they take advantage of it. They flip the narrative and say, what bothers them is that we took over an 800 square meter lab where they finance their campaigns. So here comes the Carmona case, then Mario Delgado, then Rocha Moya, then Marina del Pilar, and they start listing them. Another issue that comes up is that it's an extremely dangerous precedent. The PAN already mentioned this and submitted the proposal. Now let's see if Morena supports it. Well, let's cordially invite Rocha Moya to come and explain to us what he was doing at the meeting. With El Mayo Estambada to explain to us the setup of Gavino Cuen's murder, to tell us why he left on a private plane, supposedly belonging to El Mayo Estambada's frontman. Well, let him come and explain all that. So let's bring in the governor of Baja California, who is linked to a number of crimes, whose husband is being investigated by the prosecutor's office itself for drug trafficking, arms trafficking, money laundering, inhumane acts, fuel theft, inhumane and other serious crimes. This opens the door to completely breaking federalism, and there only Colosio and only Senator Claudia Anaya. But those who said, hey, be careful, the door that's being opened is extremely dangerous. And for everyone, this is no small matter. Of course, it should be pointed out, and of course, the Senate could have done something, summon to appear those who do have the authority to summon others to appear, which is the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the head of SEDINA, the head of the National Guard, and the head of the Immigration Institute. And with that, you can start to figure out what's going on, and then you can open another type of procedure.
Muy bien, aquí después, oye, vamos a otro asunto, ¿no? Que también ha llamado mucho la atención y para eso pues nos tenemos que ir al mapa. Ahí estamos entrando directamente a la pirámide del Sol, a Teotihuacán, un asunto muy pues tremendo en el que un chavo, una persona, entra con un arma and he starts shooting at people, something that's totally unusual in Mexico and that even draws attention to how people react. And I find that super interesting because in the end, this is also something cultural. La gente, sinceramente, well, making fun of the guy, honestly. O sea, diciendo, o sea, o sea, vamos, es una forma de ver a bit about these topics and saying, you know what, these kinds of things are nonsense in the sense that someone who apparently had some really extreme ideologies and all that, but it has drawn attention, especially because it happened in a tourist area. And in the end, that made this whole issue global news. What's your take on it? What do you make of the reactions and the whole situation? That's my quick take. A person enters with weapons, with a knife, with a gun, etc., into a tourist area, a super touristy place, which is the pyramids of Teotihuacan. And from there, well, he starts shooting and shouting a bunch of things at the people who were there. By the way, with this one, even though he's Mexican and has a Mexican accent, he used words from Spain. I don't know if maybe suddenly because of the internet or whatever, words like faller or words like that, you know, which aren't exactly, I don't know if it's just a curious thing, right? But the point is that he starts shooting at people. There's one person who loses their life and several injured. They say this guy took his own life, although they also say that the National Guard was the one who shot him and killed him. The National Guard arrives and they surround him. And well, at one point, there's the version that he took his own life, and there's the version that they took his life. But the point is, well, that they got into a fight.
Or do you want to see the very beginning, how you started? This is something totally unusual. Sadly, our country has been immersed in violence for 2 decades, but it's a different kind of violence between criminal violence and other types of violence. Obviously, it has taken, I mean, it's already hundreds of thousands of lives, far too many to count. From 2006 to now, we're talking about almost 300,050 people murdered. It's a major issue, but no, we're not used to this kind of attack happening. Of a lone wolf, of someone who, because of some idea, disorder, whim, whatever it may be, goes and carries out a shooting. There have been some cases in schools, very, very particular cases, including one in Monterrey a few years ago. But, well, it's not something common. And that, at the same time, has made us very confident in the safety of tourist areas. I mean, it's rare to find tourist areas where there's any kind of checkpoint. Who are they hiring as security guards? But, you know, that's your neighbor who has never held a weapon in his life. They put a black vest on him, and he's the security guard who's basically there for when there's a fight or someone's too drunk, I don't know, not for something like this. And I think this should make us think, I'm not saying that this is going to become a pattern or that it won't happen again, just that there's a possibility it could happen. And there are safety measures we never considered because we didn't think they were necessary. But in a country with 130 million inhabitants, there could be a guy who's not right in the head or who has really extreme ideas and could do something crazy like this. That's where I really distance myself. I also admit that it's not a topic I've followed much. I actually came across a lot of theories of all kinds, as you can imagine, right? From the idea that it was the influence of the official narrative, or that it was influenced by I don't know who, or that it was the influence of social media. A guy probably with some kind of disorder, because no person who is healthy and emotionally stable would attack strangers. I mean, that's where we start with the case. Per se, it's a lone wolf. It doesn't seem like something organized in any other way. You can even see that the guy didn't have experience or knowledge. Otherwise, he could have taken many more lives. However, I insist, I think sadly, it's an opportunity, yes, to see how we can have greater security guarantees in places that are highly, and Mexico has countless places that are beautiful, that are gorgeous, and fortunately, tragedies like this haven't happened there. But I insist, this is a country of 130 million people. We have to be more careful to have some basic security checks. And I would like this to be an opportunity to take another look at these kinds of areas and how we can guarantee safety.
Exactly. O sea, so the thing is, well, I think there's going to be a change. In fact, it's already starting to show in terms of security for tourist areas so that this doesn't happen again. And I think in general as well, a warning for families. And all of this is so that they also pay attention to their children, to their loved ones in general. If they have any kind of mental health issue, that it gets treated in time, obviously.
The reality is one of the big problems I see that we have as Mexicans is not accepting our reality. And accepting reality doesn't mean tolerating it, supporting it, or encouraging it, but rather knowing where to start in order to change things. I'm very concerned, maybe because I'm getting old, about the issue of young people. And I ask myself why. Those who are 20 years old or younger were already born into a state of violence. They were born into a war, which is this so-called or wrongly called war against drugs. Everyone who was born from 2006 onwards, who are now 20 years old, are already used to seeing a daily death toll in the news. When I was young, and I'm sure it was the same for you, a murder was international news. I mean, when someone went missing here, everyone would go out and march. Today, they're counted daily. So is there a generation that has, to some extent, already normalized this violence? And when a society normalizes violence as part of its daily life, it's extremely dangerous. And that's a point that terrifies me. I tend to keep bringing up those kinds of issues. Not because I enjoy discussing them. These topics are awful to talk about. My voice has even cracked a couple of times while reading testimonies, looking at some documents, watching some videos. It's horrible. But I think it's a topic we can't underestimate. Just to put it in perspective, as of today in Mexico, 1 out of every 1,000 Mexicans is missing. It's a number that blew my mind. When you talk about the total number of missing people, you just see it as a number simply. Simply, when you do the math, you say it can't be that 1 out of every 1,000 Mexicans is missing. It's an issue that hits really hard everywhere. And sadly, when it's an issue that should bring us all together to look for solutions, and the solutions, well, the basic ones are already known. They're even in the law. It's just about doing them, allocating resources, accepting the resources. They don't get done, and they don't get done because it becomes a political issue. It becomes a political issue for the one in power, and it becomes a political issue for the one who wants to be in power. That's how it was with Calderón. That's how it was with Peña. That's how it was with López Obrador. And that's how it's happening with Claudia Sheinbaum. This isn't a government problem. It's a problem with the state itself, which is much bigger. I mean, I don't know if I'm just going a little too fast with this. The UN, the Committee of Experts on Enforced Disappearances of the UN, published its report a few years ago. And in the last session, which was held last month, the conclusion was to activate Article 34, which means that the issue of enforced disappearances in Mexico will be brought before the UN General Assembly. What does the report say? In broad terms, first, that it is a widespread issue, that it is systematic, and that it happens in all 32 states of the country. And that's why the government, the administration since 2017 have made a series of positive reforms, but the problem has been the implementation. Mexico has a major problem with impunity. 98% of crimes go unpunished. And it ends with a series of recommendations which are to give technical support to Mexico, provide forensic support, and give money, because that's what Mexico needs to fix this problem. And just to give you an idea, in the morgues, there are 80,000 unidentified bodies. I mean, there it is. That's where many of the missing people are. If you want to scroll down,
To investigate, you have to really put a lot of intelligence into it. It's an obligation.
there's a reform from 2017 where Mexico is required by law to create a database, a genetic identification database for the disappeared and forensic laboratories, genetic laboratories, to be able to identify them. There are 72,000 skeletal remains, and most of them are found by mothers searching for their missing loved ones. Where maybe we would know, oh, hey, maybe this guy disappeared in 2000. Oh, well, but now we know, now we have the answer. And instead of juggling numbers and doing the stupid thing of trimming the list of missing people just to say you have fewer missing, well, instead, invest the money where it should go, invest it. Besides, the law is already in place. You don't even have to reform anything. It's just that instead of so many grandiose projects that haven't helped at all, well, we could have already set up our DNA bank. We could have built some labs for genetic identification, which would start to reverse this problem. But I insist, the problem is political will. And mind you, it already involves everyone.
Claro, ahí son estados, federal. Exactly. We're even talking about the same upbringing. We're talking about the same families. It's an issue. It's a complex issue. Blaming a government when the problem involves PRI, Pan Moreno. That's not the point. We need to stop politicizing things and really look at how to solve it and start working on that issue. Stop blaming others. That's it. It's already too tiring and boring, honestly, even more so. When you bring up the issue, people start leaving because they get bored with the topic. Yeah, they're already leaving. I mean, yeah, that's how it is. People are just fed up, right? There is frustration about this issue because what's missing is willpower. I mean, there's a lack of will, and you even see it on social media. The same people. Some say it's the leftists to begin with. It's like, yeah, there's the hate. You're already offending the other person. People who are left wing, people who are right wing, that doesn't make you any better or worse. Whether someone is from one side or the other, let's stop with that kind of nonsense, with those kinds of divisions. It's a ridiculous thing that never leads you to understand or have a dialogue. Y avanzar. Porque hay muchos points that could be worked on together. Absolutely. This topic, well, I find it very interesting, Giles. Anything else about this topic, about this matter?
No, Dios, mira, tristemente. I don't think anything is going to happen regarding the UN issue. The matter of Antonio Guterres' election gets in the way.
Well, yes, that's true. But I mean, but it's interesting because I feel, Giles, that I mean, there was like I don't know. I would even say there was fear in general among the leaders about the UN talking about the issue. And now that the UN has spoken, the UN as well, it's like they understood and said, let's see. I mean, understand that this isn't against you. Understand that this is to solve things. Just look at the government's reaction. It's clear to me that they didn't read the report. They didn't read it. They didn't even read it. The committee's position when activating Article 34 is very clear. Even what the government says to attack the report itself says so. It's unacceptable that they don't even take the time to read before responding and going out to shout and create an entire narrative. To feel offended when no one is offending them? I mean, they're just saying, look, there's a reality here. I'm not saying that you're the one to blame or you. I mean, it's totally multifactorial. But let's talk about the issue so we can solve it together. There's something I do want to point out about the current government in this regard, and I found it outrageous to say the least. And it's the way they lie and how they try to manipulate, because they just say, no, that's not what forced disappearance is. Then the Morena spokespersons go out, the president and the prosecutor did it too. They give you only half the definition. I mean, is it just about going on Google? You don't need anything else. I mean, how the hell do they lie to us about something as basic as the concept, the definition of a crime? I mean, damn, that's the part that really worries me. As a lawyer, you notice it faster. I mean, that's what you pick up on more quickly. That And suddenly, well, in a good part of the population, which I insist we go back to the same thing, it's become very politicized and there's been a lot of polarization. And well,
There has been
it's become fanatical. That's why there's polarization. Now, changing the subject, Jerez, there are other interesting topics too, but also talking about how people behave and how they lie for over 70 days. They said there was no oil leak in Veracruz in the Gulf, and now, well, after some time, I mean, finally they admit there was an oil leak. The fishermen, the people who live on the coast were already reporting it. There were images, photos of everything, but they denied the reality for more than 2 months. I mean,
the series of excuses they come up with is also crazy. There's a video that I think perfectly portrays Mexican politics, which is of the governor of Veracruz, Rocio Nales, where I share a video of how they're catching fish during Holy Week, and you say, dude, the fish are coming out of the sea because of the spill. I mean, the shore is literally full of fish, and there are people grabbing fish. And you say, hey, don't think the fish came out because they said, oh, look, it's Holy Week, dude, let them eat me. They came out because it's full of oil. I mean, and this was reported, like you said, at the beginning of February. Dude, hold on. What did the government do? First, they denied it. Then they said it was a private ship. Then they said it was natural oil seeps. Then they said it was a ghost ship from who knows where. Then they were saying it was from fuel theft. And it wasn't until NGOs came out to show the satellite images. Where was the leak from and how did it start and how was it in the Pemex pipelines? And then when the director of Pemex had to come out, oh, well, yes, it was us, but they didn't inform me, so we're going to fire those who didn't.
inform us properly, right? The scapegoat.
It's like with the interoceanic train. You blame the engineer for speeding and threaten jail, even though you didn't give him a speedometer to know his speed, but still hold him responsible.
Of course.
He says, hey, please, I mean, and that's what, but anyway.
I found it interesting, Jerez, even though it took them 2 months and they, what the previous 6 years had gotten us used to, right? In which there was no recognition and that was it, period. It didn't matter if 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, or 10 months went by. There are issues and documented realities that were never acknowledged. For example, the issue of the cenotes and that whole situation. Oh no, it doesn't happen, period. Here are the images, here are the videos. It doesn't happen, nothing's going on. And you say, at least here it seems like there's a certain common sense where eventually some realities are acknowledged, even if it takes time. And that catches my attention because it was really frustrating that it didn't happen. I mean, that you could see the reality, see all the documentation, and then they say, oh no, that's just to politicize things. And the craziest part is seeing people trying to defend that, right? You say, wait, they're showing you reality. Do you see it? The testimonies are out there. And wanting to see everything through the filter of politics is a mistake, and it's awful too. I mean, are there things that are just reality? Period. They're there. No, not everything is about being against or being in favor. No, it's not like that. I mean, if not, we'll never move forward like this. And this is very, very manipulated. I mean, it's really intense.
A lot of things are coming from the federal government right now. I'll play devil's advocate now. I do think that the one who wasn't informed as much about the issue of the disappeared, as well as about Pemex and other topics, was the president, and that the statements she made were based on the briefing cards they gave her. Because look, she's not going to go to Pemex to see what's going on, nor is she going to read the entire CAP report herself. That's what her team is for, and her team is the one that has to inform her. I think the information is being given completely incorrectly because I can't explain why she would react in such a stupid, such an absurd way. You can say, I legitimize this for them, which they also did, but not lie so blatantly. It seems childish to me, especially in politics, and I relate that to what's happening about the moves happening in the cabinet and in the party. That's where they want to fire Luisa Maria Alcalde from the presidency of Morena. Those are consequences of these mistakes. I think my theory is mine. Claudia Sheinbaum is about to become president. I think in a few months she will already be looking to become the president of Mexico. because she already removed Adán Augusto as Senate coordinator. Remember that Adán Augusto was the Senate coordinator. Because that was the agreement in the Corcolatas game that López Obrador made in a restaurant where he assigned Marcelo Ebrard, who is now under investigation because his son lived for 6 months in the embassy as if it were an Airbnb. Claudia Scheinbaum said an investigation is already underway as usual. Luisa Maria Alcalde added that nothing similar will happen to her and expressed respect. However, she was already dismissed. They give Luisa Maria the legal counsel position, and you might say, hey, that's a good job. Yes, but let's not forget that she was Secretary of the Interior. Basically, it's like if you were the CEO of a company and they send you to be an assistant on the first floor, the one who takes out the glasses.
El que saca las copias básicas.
Fue un madrazo durísimo. Tienes el tema de mandar a Citlali Hernández, que al parecer es mucho más cercana ya a la presidenta, a controlar la elección de Morena,
Sí.
que ya empezaron. Recuerda que ellos ya están en su pre-campaña, que en junio, aunque el proceso electoral inicia en octubre formalmente y las precampañas hasta el otro año.
In June, they already choose the candidates with this thing they call defenders of the transformation or some similar nonsense. You have the movement of Esteban Moctezuma, which is no small thing. He's the ambassador of Mexico to the United States. His name has already come up. You had the foreign affairs issue with Jose Narro, although there Jose Narro explains that it's because of a health problem and that he had indeed already been absent twice due to health issues. There are two things there. One, everyone will be watching every minute, and the other is that he resigns an hour before the CED report is published. That's it. Jose Narro was the rector of UNAM. I think he remembered he had a bit of dignity. He said, look, I'm not going to come out and contradict this report because it's nonsense. I think he didn't play along with that game, and I think that's the reason. Now, that's what's happening in the cabinet right now about the narratives. What's the danger? I'll now discuss the Supreme Court, also known as the Accordion Court. There are two very concerning issues with Lenia Batres specifically. In a ruling, Lenia Batres says we can't be against the government. The Constitution is there to protect the government and its projects. What? How? Hold on. And she's a justice, damn it. Look, the Constitution is there to defend the citizen from the government. Exactly, it's there to prevent the abuse of power. The Supreme Court was created precisely for that. That's why we have a constitution. That's what the individual rights enshrined in the Constitution are for. Why? Because those with power can abuse those without it. Who has power? The government. Who lacks it? Private citizens. But what does she say in her ruling, in her statement? And they voted in favor of it. They say, no, the Constitution should protect the government. That's what the Constitution is for. And the other issue is what just happened with Mati Batres and her. There is a debt that SST owes to Mexico City for about 6 billion pesos. This has already reached the Supreme Court, and the justice assigned to the case is Lenia Batres. But Lenia Batres is the sister of Marti Batres, who is the director. She is legally barred from handling the case by law. She should have recused herself. And like that, every day there are blunders happening, some of which are absurd and make you laugh. Oh, look, they made a mistake. They don't know what they're voting on. And this happens in every session. It's because of them. It's really gone viral. But that's minimal. But there are very serious things happening inside the court, like the injunctions they just dismissed regarding the pension issue. Look clearly and listen, I'm totally in favor of the consequences of that reform. Why? Because they plan to pay high pensions in teaching and bureaucracy. This will impact many, especially in the states. It will help the states significantly, but it's unconstitutional and violates international conventions. What does it mean to violate international conventions? Conventionality means that rights can never be diminished. They always have to be progressive. In other words, if you have acquired rights, the government can't take them away from you. You can gain new and more rights, but not lose them. Well, this reform goes against international conventions. Why? Because they're removing a right you already have to specific care. No, all the Amparo petitions were dismissed because you can no longer challenge a constitutional reform through Amparo. That change was made by López Obrador. This president, really tough. And to top it all off, there's the envy issue, the 3 counselors they appointed. I mean, I'm going to do a deeper investigation, especially about the 2 female counselors. They do have electoral experience, but they've been very controversial, both because of their closeness to Morena and their decisions. But one in particular, this Arturo Chavez, if I remember the name correctly, he wasn't just a Morena candidate. He was an advisor to Claudia Sheinbaum when Claudia Sheinbaum was mayor, and he was an advisor to Claudia Sheinbaum when Claudia Sheinbaum was head of government of Mexico City. And right now, he's the head of the office where the official gazette is printed. The workshops, I can't remember the name right now, but he had a position within the government, the Mexican government printing office. He was the director. They're the ones in charge of printing the official gazette, printing things like election records, election ballots, and so on. He's a guy who has no electoral experience, who just happened to get a 99 on an exam where it's hard for even a magistrate to score above 85. And this guy with no prior electoral knowledge gets a 99 out of 100. You say, well, let's see. It's like the whole thing with today. Right now, do you already have them? Out of the 11 councillors, you already have at least 7 or 8 who are clearly aligned with and allied to the government. The Electoral Institute has already gone through the same thing as the Electoral Tribunal. What can we expect? I mean, you start adding up those points, and at the very least, it's dangerous. At the very least, it's risky. And for example, for those listening to us who support the government, this administration, set aside who is governing. Imagine it like this: all this legal infrastructure to control the Supreme Court, control over the prosecutor's office, over Congress, over the INE, over the Electoral Tribunal. Put Calderon there, or put Peña there, or put Salinas de Gortari there, or put the person you least want to come to power there. Imagine that scenario, and that's a possibility. Let's suppose that the president is the best person in the world and would be incapable of making even the slightest mistake. And who can guarantee that in 6 years a wolf in sheep's clothing won't come along, or in 12 or 18 or 24? We don't know what will happen then. And you're leaving an institutional structure that allows you to use power as you please without facing any consequences. I mean, imagine the politician you hate the most being in power with these institutions, with these laws.
At the end of the day, let's say that a lot of people who end up supporting these kinds of things do it because they probably agree with the government right now. But those same laws will apply to whoever is in power in the future. So that's why they need to be neutral. That's why they need to be, laws that can really work no matter what. No matter what government comes later, whatever happens.
Laws that protect themselves are exactly how government should be.
Hey, Gary, that was great, huh? Well, that's just how it is. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to discuss before we...
So much to do, but they'll only give us 3 more hours. We have to keep an eye on what's happening in Peru because, yes, it's a scandal what's going on there. I mean, political scandals aren't new, but this one is extremely complicated. Yesterday, the prosecutor's office raided the house of the former president of the OMP, which would be like the INE, the Electoral Institute. The accusations of fraud are huge. There are a lot of indications that a very, very big fraud was committed, especially in Lima. It's still unclear which of the second or third place candidates will make it, right? Both of them are claiming fraud. From the way things are going, it does seem like it's Aliaga who was affected, but still both Aliaga's reaction and Roberto Sanchez's reaction seem extremely dangerous to me. I mean, I think at this point, Keiko Fujimori is the best option. That's what's certain, because the reaction, especially from Aliaga, is something to be careful about. I mean, the kind of people we're talking about here, autocrats, those who want to be autocrats, they're not democratic. I think the reaction has been, even though the issue is serious, I think there are ways to react. And basically what this guy is doing is almost a call to violence. I mean, watch out. And this is Trump's candidate, by the way, and it's very likely that he'll be the one to come in second place. What really caught my attention were his reactions and the violence. And on the other hand, you have a guy who's really close to Pedro Castillo, one of those who wants to take away the central bank's independence. And I think his statements are crazy. So it looks like Keiko Fujimori on her 4th try might finally win. Hopefully, considering the kind of people around her.
So do you want to there were several issues. There was an election in Peru. Will there be a second round or not? There has to be. They're accusing each other of fraud. Who are they accusing of fraud? Keiko Fujimori and her team?
Or who are they accusing? No, they're accusing the Electoral Institute of fraud, yes.
The institute would have had to commit fraud to benefit someone, specifically Keiko.
Is it in favor of Roberto Fernandez?
In favor of Roberto Sanchez, who is the one who comes in second place?
Careful, that's what they say. The judicial investigation is ongoing.
Imagine that I don't know anything, absolutely nothing, or that the people who are watching don't know anything, absolutely.
30% of the polling stations, 30% in Lima, weren't set up until after 1 in the afternoon.
Okay, presidential elections.
For president. So if I went at 7 in the morning when the polling stations open because I work at 10, well, maybe I won't come back after 1. There were 800,000 people affected there, okay?
But they didn't vote. I mean, they never opened.
No se abrieron. They opened after 1, others after 2, even up to 3 in the afternoon.
And they were given another day to vote.
No, that was it. That's all it was. In the ones that didn't open, the ones that opened late, you couldn't vote the next day.
The ones that didn't open were opened another day, but the ones that opened late did not. So if people only had free time in the morning, they couldn't vote.
It's really important to know how many people lost their right to vote. That's why it's a crime. Why? Because there was an omission by the authority.
Isn't that enough to cancel the election?
For me, yes, for me it is. However, they're not going to cancel it, okay?
So it's not going to be canceled. The second round has opened up. Who's in second place? So
it's still not known. I mean, up until now, it's not known. The difference between Roberto Sanchez and Aliaga is less than half a percentage point.
For the friends who are watching us and know absolutely nothing, let's see. I mean, in Peru, there's a second round. I mean, first you vote among many candidates. So that only 2 are left, that's it. And the ones who are on top, first and second place, there's another election, which is the second round. And then the president is chosen. So that's a very interesting way to make sure the best decision is made, democratically speaking. The problem is that it's been 10 years, Peru, well, actually more, of changing presidents. It's 8 presidents in 10 years or something like that. I mean, a decade with 8 presidents, just imagine. I mean, it's crazy. The point is that when are the elections? The second round is in June.
I don't remember. It's on the 20-something.
I mean, in June, it's the second round where we don't know who the other candidate is. I mean, Keiko Fujimori, Fujimori's daughter, she's certain. She has to be.
By the way,
if she loses,
she will set a world record as the only person who has lost 4 times. A second round of elections.
I mean, she will be running for the presidency for the 4th or 5th time this time. For the 4th time, okay?
She always makes it to the second round, but she always loses, and she's lost by 1 point or 5 points. She's lost by the smallest margins, but she always loses.
She has been close to becoming president, but she hasn't been able to do it. So now there are 2 people. One is the one Trump wants as president, and the other is the one backed by Castillo. Castillo being the former president, who was president of Peru and is now in jail for trying to stage a coup, a very serious move within Peru.
Congress and the judiciary with one that would be
the far left wing, so to speak, right?
Bolivarian left, radical.
Exactly. And the other one is on the
right,
to the Trumpist right, and Keiko Fujimori, who is another one too, another one on the right. So if in the case that it happens, there are 2 right-wing candidates left here instead of a winner.
I see Keiko.
I mean, if there are right-wing candidates left, I see
Keiko.
And if it's someone from the left, do you still see Keiko making it? Well, there you go.
So I see it this way. There were 35 candidates, and the ones who got the most votes were the right wing by far, okay, spread among 35 candidates.
It's a bit like what happened in Bolivia. So there's a shift, a bit like what happened in Bolivia, where there's a shift among the people. They said, well, the left didn't deliver on what they promised. So now we're going to move more toward the right.
Like Bolivia, Peru has seen frequent shifts between right and left.
Well, there have been more changes.
Because then the people on the left see Aliaga as enemy number 1, and with good reason. And Aliaga's people see Roberto Sanchez as enemy number one. That's why I believe those votes would support Keiko, not for her, but to prevent the other candidate from winning. And the other part is that Keiko Fujimori does have a sizable loyal voter base. That's why she always makes it to the second round. She doesn't have enough to win, but with all this chaos, maybe she does. It's said that this fraud favors Roberto Sanchez because this only happened in Lima, where in theory it's easier to distribute election materials. And where the left has the least electoral strength is in the capital. They have more in rural areas and in the capital. Aliaga was the mayor. There were three strong candidates in Lima, Peru: Aliaga, Belmont, and Fujimori. Roberto Sanchez wasn't a contender in the capital. He was a contender outside the capital. So, hey, with this mess that happened coincidentally in the capital, where it's easier to deliver the electoral packages, the one being harmed here is Aliaga. That's Aliaga's argument, and it makes sense given how things happened. Now, which company was it? One had already been sanctioned. The company in charge of the distribution 2 weeks before, the company responsible for the distribution was looking to rent vans for election day just 2 weeks before. But what does the company say? The company says, hey, but it wasn't my fault. They gave me the electoral material after 8 in the morning on election day when they should have given it to me first thing a day before. Is that real? You shouldn't deliver electoral material on the same day. It should have been transported the night before to the schools with polling stations. But the company says it's not my fault. They gave it to me on election day at 8 in the morning.
Okay.
It's a mess everywhere. There may be fault on the company's part. There's an omission. Clearly on the part of the electoral authority, there's a responsibility. Obviously, the question is how far this will go. There are already investigations, in fact, very quickly. On Monday, the day after the election, someone was placed under preventive arrest. I think he was the general manager. I don't remember exactly what the position was, part of the NGO, but he was in charge of logistics.
Okay.
It was an extremely bizarre election. In fact, they had to extend it by an hour, and the voting was reopened the next day for people to vote again. What's happening in Peru is crazy, but fortunately, Peru's economy remains stable, and we still envy Peru for that.
No, well, I mean, that's important, I think, Peru has talked a lot about this topic, but I think I would also say that Mexico has this issue too. We must remember how past crises were experienced, regardless of the governments at the time. Well, you see a stable currency, you see an impressive increase in investment.
It's important that Peru has preserved the central bank's independence and autonomy.
There, you have to give credit to all the governments, PRI, PAN, Morena, that have maintained that independence in recent years at least, and that has helped with the stability of the currency. Well, the Mexican peso is one of the currencies that have appreciated the most in the world. And right now, I mean, it's strong despite everything that has happened. And with oil and all that, I think Latin America also had to learn at some point, not just leave it up to the politicians to do their thing,
New countries.
but let the economy run on its own, let it move forward. Because if not, then it turns into chaos. And I say here, I mean, in the last 10 years, it's been impressive. And I think the same thing is happening now in Baja California, also in Querétaro. More and more companies from all over the world are opening and opening and opening. And you say it's become normal to go to any mall and you see Koreans, Indians, Japanese, all kinds of people really. And the companies, well, they're just growing and growing, and obviously so are the costs, especially the rents, right? Gentrification. In the end, it's really impressive, and you see how, well, you say just imagine the power we would have if there were more political stability and more respect for all these issues of independence. To let, let's say, the justice system do its job and the federal government do its job. You know what I mean? If there were that balance, a little more maturity, but like you said, we're new countries, and in many ways, well, we still need to keep evolving little by little and keep moving forward. Obviously, not everything is negative. Here, we have to talk about the hardest, most difficult parts, because that's where things can be improved. What's already being done well is great.
And we also have to get back to being critical. We have to be critical of whoever is governing, whoever it is. Why? Because they are the ones governing, and it's not about looking for the good things. For example, I don't really like to focus on the good things a government does. unless they are truly significant or spectacular things, because it's their obligation and that's what they're paid for. That's why they're there. Because I do think we need to talk about the bad things a government does in order to notice them and correct them. So that the citizens force the government to correct itself, and I think there have already been some cases where the government has corrected itself precisely because of social pressure. We saw it recently with La Luz del Mundo, which is another big topic. With the issue of shelving the case, another blatant lie, because they say, no, that wasn't with Gertz. Hey, the case was shelved 2 weeks after the prosecutor's office took over. Ernestina Godoy, clearly, when you take office as the head of the prosecutor's office, the first thing they do is give you the most important documents and the most important cases. The fact that they give it to you 2 weeks later is a separate issue you have. It's not about a presumed culprit. The guy is already sentenced and serving time in the United States, and most of his crimes were committed in Mexico. It's just that he also committed crimes over there, and he's still facing proceedings there.
Y no es posible que aquí, después de
Since 2019, now it's 2025. In December is when they closed the case. They closed it because there was no evidence for responsibility. The guy confessed, the guy is sentenced, so there's no argument to say otherwise. And when this news comes out, because look, this happened in December and it wasn't made public until now, and when it does come out, the government washes its hands of it. But fortunately, there was enough social pressure for the government to say, oh no, yes, we're going to reopen it. We're going to tell the judge to reopen it. Look, the hearing was on Thursday and it was postponed. No doubt they're buying time, so the issue dies down. And that's when you have to pay very close attention to the victims. Let's see what they're telling us. When the new hearing takes place, because in theory, the prosecutor's office itself is going to ask the judge to reopen the case. This is nonsense. You don't need to ask the judge, open it.
Exactly.
Exactly. The victims ask the judge to intervene because their rights are being violated. You're not violating anything. Since you accept it, just reopen it. But it's this very perverse and Machiavellian game of propaganda and narratives. And sadly, it happens in almost every country in this bizarre era we're living in.
Great. Well, Jers, let's go then. Thank you all for joining us. Greetings to the community. This is very interesting. And I think we didn't even cover half of all the topics we still have left, Giris.
I still had about 42 left.
We've had our ups and downs, but honestly, I really hope we can start doing this more often. Well, we're even doing it twice a week now, so you just let me know how you're doing and we'll coordinate. We'll pick it back up. That's the point. It's good to keep talking. After all, it's a conversation we enjoy having with you, and the idea is just to talk about all the bizarre things that were happening in the world. Thank you.
It's real.
Right? Totally. Gears, well, your channel is already well known, but there on the screen it says Gears 73. Also, if you're watching it later, the channel appears. You subscribe to this channel and automatically you'll also get the option to subscribe to Gears' channel. So, well, subscribe to this one and obviously subscribe to Gears' channel too. And well, that way you'll start getting the updates. If you can, go ahead and hit the bell and select all notifications so you actually get the updates. Then you can decide what to watch and what not to watch. But that's also, well, it's important, right? Support the community, support the channels here that, well, we're here independently talking live every day, right? Being here, well, open to your comments and reacting with all of you day by day. Well, obviously, when it's live, sometimes you make mistakes or say something. I mean, it's not as perfect as the videos that are pre-recorded. But I also think that's important in this day and age, Giris.
It has its value. It has its value.
It has its value, exactly. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yes. Thank you, as always, for the invitation. Honestly, I have my phone right here, but I couldn't check the comments because I was so into the conversation. I want to greet the whole community, thank everyone who has subscribed, and for those who haven't, invite them to subscribe to the channel. We're uploading content almost every day. I focus more on national news, but we also talk about international news and geopolitics. We have some rather unusual segments where I'm experimenting. One is about the digital plaza on Twitter, and in the short section, it's more like political satire. It's very brief. A minute doesn't give you much time, but it's enough to poke a little fun at the situation. I have a segment called Creatology, where we talk about literature. In fact, today, in a little while, we're going to record about Egyptian literature, which is also wild, a real trip. And well, as always, I want to thank you and hope to see you again soon.
A big shout out, Jerez. Stay tuned for Cartology, which is a section on your channel that talks about books, so about authors, right?
Yes, we started season 0. We picked some books, we picked some authors, and now in this season 1, as we've decided to call it, I do this with a friend who's a literature teacher and really knows his stuff. It's a journey through all of history. We started with literature in Mesopotamia, Sumer. Now we're moving on to Egypt, and that's how we'll keep going. And then again with specific books.
No, well, we'll be there. Is it live or recorded? How does the summary work?
Most have been live, but due to a minor issue, today's will be recorded and released tomorrow.
Okay, great. We'll be watching for the video. Big greetings to Tino, Eliseo, Ben, Christy Kranz, to the whole community, DD200 or something like that. Greetings. How have you been? Thank you so much, Ana Lydia.
For the comment I'm seeing here.
Awesome. Rublox Jams. Well, to the whole community, thank you so much for joining us. It's great that we can be here no matter how things have been. Big greetings to everyone. The question about Peru's F-16 planes is still pending. We'll keep it in mind.
Apparently that purchase had already been scheduled before. It's a purchase of some F-16s, but it seems like they're not in very good condition. Honestly, I'm not too familiar with the topic.
So yes, we need to check it, but I mean, it still remains pending. So greetings also to the entire community watching us in the United States, in Spain, obviously here in Mexico, in Peru, everywhere. Thank you very much.
Gires, in Timbuktu too.
In Timbuktu, in Taiwan, that's great. Big hug, Gires. Take care. See you later. Goodbye.
Interrumpimos su programación habitual.
Thank you for tuning in to The Truth. This is Pepe Live.
La verdad es intensa. Lo insólito es real. Aquí lo analizamos, enfoque global. No te quedes fuera. Conecta al canal. Pepe en vivo controlando la señal. Pepe y Astrid tirando la neta. Periodismo crudo, aquí se respeta. Activa la alerta, no pierdas la pista. Hasta la próxima. ¡Sí, señor!
We're taking attendance.
Suscríbete. Pepe en vivo en la casa.
Pa.